Everyone knows how the Library of Alexandria ended. A fire, one catastrophic night, a mob or an army or a fanatic, and the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world goes up in smoke. Centuries of learning, lost in an evening. People will tell you that if it had survived, we would have reached the moon 500 years earlier. It is one of the most emotionally powerful stories in history, and it did not happen. There was no single fire. There was no night on which the ancient world's knowledge was destroyed. What actually happened is slower, less dramatic, and considerably more disturbing, because it is a thing that can happen again, and is not obvious while it is happening. Start with what the library actually was, because the popular image is wrong in a specific way. It was not a single grand building with a dome roof full of scrolls. It was part of a larger institution called the museum, which meant a shrine to the muses, and which functioned roughly as a state-funded research institute. Scholars were given salaries, accommodation, meals, and freedom from taxation in exchange for being there and working. It was founded in the 3rd century BC by the Greek dynasty that ruled Egypt after Alexander, and its purpose was explicitly political as well as intellectual. A ruling family that was ethnically Greek, governing an ancient Egyptian population is in a new cities, needed prestige. So they bought it, and the collecting policy was aggressive in ways that are quite funny. By several accounts, ships arriving in the harbor were searched for books. Any found were taken, copied, and the copy returned to the owner while the original stayed in the library. They also, by one account, borrowed the official Athenian text of the great tragedians against an enormous deposit, kept the originals, returned copies, and simply forfeited the money. This was not a gentle institution. It was a state project with a budget and an agenda. Now, the fires. There are several, and they are all real. And none of them is the story you were told. The first is Julius Caesar in 48 BC. Caught in a civil war in the harbor, he set fire to ships, and the fire spread into dockside buildings. Some sources say warehouses of books burned. It was a genuine loss. It was not a library, which was in a different part of the city, and which continued to operate afterwards, because we have record of scholars working there for centuries following. Then there is a series of later events. A Roman emperor attacking the city in the 3rd century AD. Another in the same century. Religious conflict in the 4th, during which a temple that housed a daughter collection was destroyed, and an Arab conquest in the 7th century, which produced a very famous anecdote about books being used to heat bathhouses. That anecdote appears about 500 years after the event, in a single source, and is regarded by most historians as a later invention. By the time of the Arab conquest, the library had not functioned as a major institution for a very long time. There was, in effect, nothing left to burn. So what did happen? Money. The museum worked because a state paid for it. Salaries, buildings, scribes, papyrus, and the enormous ongoing cost of copying. That last one is the part people underestimate. Papyrus does not last. In the Egyptian climate, it survives better than most places. But a scroll in use, handle and unroll, degrades, which means a library of that kind is not a warehouse. It is a process. To keep a text, you have to keep copying it by hand, forever. And every copy costs money and time. Stop paying, and the collection does not sit there waiting. It rots at the speed of the material, and the funding did stop, gradually. In the 2nd century BC, one of the Ptolemaic rulers expelled scholars from the city during a political purge. Many left and did not come back. That is not a fire. That is a personnel decision. The dynasty declined. The Roman period brought different priorities. Support became irregular. Rival institutions grew in Pergamon and later in Rome and Constantinople, and the best scholars went where the money was, which is what scholars have always done. The head librarian post, which had once been one of the most prestigious positions in the Greek world, was at one point given to a military officer as a political favor. That single detail tells you more about the decline than any fire. When the top academic job becomes a patronage prize, the institution has already ended. It just has not noticed yet. So the library did not burn down. It was defunded, politically interfered with, allowed to decay, and gradually made irrelevant by places that were better supported. The collection did not vanish in an evening. It shrank over centuries as copies were not made, scrolls were not replaced, and nobody in charge considered it urgent. Now, why does the fire story persist? Because it is enormously more satisfying. A fire has a villain. Depending on who is telling it, that villain is Caesar, or Christians, or Muslims. And the story has been used by each of those arguments in turn, which should itself be a warning. A fire also has a moment. You can point to it. You can mourn it. You can imagine the alternative history in which it didn't happen. Slow institutional decay offers none of that. There's nobody to blame, no date to mark, and no dramatic image. There is just a series of reasonable seeming decisions about budgets made by people who were not thinking about the next 1,000 years, because almost nobody ever is. And here is the part I think actually matters. The fire story is comforting. It says that knowledge is lost to catastrophe, to armies, to fanatics, to disaster, which implies that in the absence of catastrophe, knowledge is safe. The real story says the opposite. Knowledge is lost to indifference, to budgets not renewed, to copies not made, to buildings not maintained, to a post being handed to somebody's friend, none of which looks like a disaster at the time, all of which looks from the inside like a difficult year, followed by another one. The Library of Alexandria did not go up in flames. It was allowed to become less important than other things by people who each had perfectly good reasons, until one day there was nothing there worth burning.